Often the work of ABM is straightforward and relatively easily implemented. The provision of clean water, access to education and assistance in income generation are practical responses that can be built. Training people to communicate, to embrace their similarities and not to be divided by their differences is a much more complex challenge.
For both the major groups we've got, Nuer and Anuak, they're both tribes are divided into clans and subclans, family groupings essentially, who've inhabited geographical areas. And when they meet together, there's always some conflict between the two, between the various groups, whether it's over resources or power, authority, these sorts of things.
Most of the churches in the Gambella region are not near the city of Gambella itself. And if you have to walk, it's between 1 and 4 days. But if you're lucky enough to catch the bus, like we have, it's a journey of between 1 and 8 hours. And I can tell you, it's a trip that'll test whether the fillings will really stay in your teeth.
The Anuak are a river people, living a subsistence life based around fishing, while the Nuer are semi-nomadic pastoralists, their life traditionally and inextricably linked to their cattle. The huge displacement of people from Sudan has meant that these two peoples are now living on top of each other. We visited the remote town of Itang to find out more about the issues this has created and how ABM and its partners are helping the locals to work through them. Simon is a Nuer priest serving at St Mary's Itang. It's a challenging job, especially when your flock are landless and homeless, are people on the move, sometimes by choice, sometimes not.
And then when the government settle the peace, and then there is a peace in every place now, there is a peace in the border between the Ethiopia and the Sudan, and then the government will decide to move back the people.
The heart of his mission centre was ripped out. Half the churches were moved forcibly.
Not only does St Mary's have the usual challenges of any Anglican congregation, but the compound is subject to flooding in the wet and attack from termites when it's not. But the hearts of her people beat strong, and their worship is a blessing to behold. Life is hard for people in the Gambella region, but it is still full of richness and meaning.
Despite the fact they've been through a terrible civil war in southern Sudan, some of them, despite the fact some of them have been child soldiers and have actually been made to do dreadful things to other human beings, despite the fact that there's been real hunger down there this year, that there's always the risk of intertribal conflict and violence and cattle rustling and murders and all these sorts of things, that God is all they've got. And they'll often come up to you and say, God bless you. An old woman, newer woman came to me this week. I can't remember the words that she used, but she just said, don't worry, God will bless you. That's pretty humbling, certainly for us, and I think that's probably fairly incomprehensible for many of us from the West as well, to be honest.
The gospel thrives here, and Luke, an Anuak tribal man and pastor of the Anuak congregation, sums up the evangelistic call on his life succinctly.
Because God needs all people to be in His kingdom.
Not only has he established a growing congregation in Itang, but has planted churches across the river as well.
And for Luke, when he goes to visit his other churches, it's not a bus ride, but a gentle paddle across a massive river infested with crocodiles. What more could you hope for?
Travelling along the river to Imar is like walking into a Dr. Livingstone documentary. There are very few markers to indicate that we remain in the 21st century. Life goes on here, largely as it has for countless generations, making the arrival of refugees on such a large scale due to a conflict fought with modern weapons and about distant politics confusing and destabilising.
The simplicity, the beauty and the faith of the African Church is expressed wonderfully by this congregation here at Imar. They live among the mango trees on the banks of a mighty river. But their reality is they simply don't have enough money even to buy a Bible or a skin for their own drum. They borrowed this one from the Baptists.
And so they invite us to share the only gift they have to offer, to join with them in prayer and praise. Individually, both the Nua and Anuak consider the gospel a blessing. But where does it fit as a living reality when a culture of violence and disagreement exists between them?
From Nuer tribe, Anuak tribe, Islander, just they need to have a strong relationship, a strong agreement. If it is not come from God, just I think no peace can be happen here anytime.
We're just beginning to learn how to get on with each other. They're beginning to learn what it might mean to be an Anglican in an Ethiopian context. Forget about England or anywhere else you might know of, in an Ethiopian context. And that's the beauty of the Anglican Church when it's working properly, actually, that it's a local church with sort of international and global dimension to it. So I think that at the moment they actually need somebody to be with them here, just to help them to find the way ahead, to establish the kind of church that they can inhabit, the kind of space they can inhabit and actually be at home with and actually make it work for them.
It's meetings like this General Assembly at Gambella that simply can't be underestimated for their importance. This is a place where different tribes are able to come together, often tribes who have been in the past warring with each other. They sit down, they have Bible study, they have a chance to speak and talk about what the gospel really means to them. And all of a sudden, unity starts to become a real possibility.
I see it as an opportunity to see people, to understand the issues they're wrestling with, and to teach and to train. And this year's local assembly, this year's walking together, 3 days we spent, 150 people, was all about addressing the issues of tribalism and clanism and Anglican identity.
It's not glamorous work. It's not as clearly practical as clean water gushing out of a tap or husked rice filling sacks and stomachs as a result of a community-owned mill, but this ABM-supported training project, bringing people together to talk, to listen, and to find common ground for the future, will impact lives just as dramatically. In a land with so little access to the communication options we take for granted, gatherings like this one are vital. Faces that were foes become friends, and open discussion plants the seeds of trust. It's about learning to communicate and teaching church leaders how to be an example to their people and envoys of peace. It can be frustrating work, but for Luke and Simon, it's more than simply responding to the gospel. It's about the future of their families and of the country they believe God loves.
We still rich in the Ethiopian history, even though we are poor because of the famine, because of the lack of many things. We still love Ethiopian history, and then one day we saw that we will be rich also when we have a knowledge in mind. God loved Africa and loved the African also, because all people have been created by God.
You are the most holy one, enthroned in splendor and light. Yet, in the coming of your Son, Jesus Christ, you reveal the power of your love, made perfect in our human weakness.
As Jesus united his disciples to himself and each other with the breaking of bread and the drinking of wine, so do the people of Gambella, Itang, and the many small towns and communities represented here share Eucharist, standing side by side, endeavouring to forge understanding in the hope of an harmonious and peaceful future.
What does it mean to be a Christian, formed, if you like, in the image and likeness of Christ, as far as that is possible in this life, and not to be caught up in all those cultural things that are so strong. And we can see the things that are strong in them, for them, in their culture. And often by looking at their culture, we can begin to see the kind of things that actually trap us. And so we're walking together, we're learning together about what it means to be disciples of Christ, which is a lifelong process.
We seem to have a little bit of a problem. You see, the canoe comes to here, the bank is there. Some of us may actually have to get our feet wet.